And we're live.
Hello, everybody.
Hey, everyone. Hey, Josh.
Hey, Lisa. And welcome to the Dark Ozarks.
It is Wednesday evening, and we have a fun topic.
We do. And I think a very, hoodoo. What kind of hoodoo do you do?
That's right.
I love the title. I really do. That was all you, Lisa. That's off to you.
Oh, thanks. And there's lots of hoodoos. That's the thing.
Mm-hmm. And lots of context and a lot of history and a lot of lore coming from a variety of sources, some of which might prove surprising. I just realized, I looked it up. I kind of knew it was happening anyway, but this is the last Dark Ozarks broadcast of the summer of 2022.
That's correct.
The autumnal equinox takes place tomorrow at 8:03 p.m. Central Standard Time, and which means the next time that you see us, it will be autumn, and I'm excited.
I am too. We've been kicking things off a little bit already, and very quickly, why don't we just run down upcoming events? And for information on everything, you can go to paranormalsciencelab.com for information and tickets.
Absolutely. And first off, we're going to be in Caney, Kansas on Saturday.
Yeah. And that's a free event.
Yes. Paracon, I believe, as the...
Yes, the Border Town Paracon.
Yes, with Southeast Kansas. And I'm just publicly coming clean. Huge confession on my part. This is the first Paracon I've ever been to.
Well, we've done Mysterious War States. It's pretty much, but
okay. I just think of that as like our fun gathering at the Coleman in Miami, Oklahoma.
Yeah. Now this will be more of the sort of a little more traditional Paracon format. So it's free. Come out. There's going to be lots of people there, lots of topics. So and it's in the little Ozarks of Kansas. So
yes, it is. I request zebra cakes backstage.
Okay. Request away.
Just throwing that out there into the ether. I'd like a box of zebra cakes with my name on it. You can get them at the
You
dollar.
heard that, Jessica.
I'll let you do the rundown. I'll be quiet for a moment. We've got a full slate of autumnal events coming up.
We do, and we hit the ground running again October 7th in downtown Hollister, Missouri, for the Hollister Haunted Walking Tour, which is in conjunction with the First Friday Art Walk. And we're going to be touring the Old English Inn. There's going to be ghost tales and other entertainment. So it's going to be a lot of fun. Then on October 15th, we are in Joplin for Dark Ozarks, October Country, at the VFW 534. It's an all-day event covering pretty much everything under our umbrella for Dark Ozarks, and lots of things going on. Then on October 20th, we are back in Joplin for the Old Joplin Downtown Walking Tour, which covers the wild history and ghost tales of early Joplin. And that is in conjunction with Third Thursday Art Walk, which is put on by Joplin Downtown Alliance, and we're pleased to work with them. Then on October 29th, we are in Natonia, Missouri for a tour and investigation at the Ritchie Mansion and a tour of the Civil War Cemetery. And there's going to be all kinds of things going on in there as well. So October is going to be full. I should say, just on the calendar, October 27th will be the yearly spook tour with Kids 102.5 in Joplin. October 28th is Halloween festivities in Hollister.
Yes.
And I don't know if we were doing something that night or not.
I'm not sure either. It's we're playing that one by ear right at the moment. I think it has a bit to do with how quickly the October 7th date sells out, and it is selling tickets.
It is. It's selling through. I just saw a notice today of 4 more tickets selling. So, so we are getting. We aren't sold out, but it's starting to creep up there. So if you're interested in that event, I would get your tickets before it's too late.
Yes.
Then in November 19th, we have 2 events in one day. In the afternoon, 2 to 4, we will be at Always Buying Books in Joplin, Missouri for book signing for you and I. Then that night, we will be at the Webb City Library for a tour and investigation, proceeds helping the library. And that's always a great event. So it's a pretty full slate.
It is a full slate. Very excited about that. And we are certainly being definitely assisted by this by 2 really phenomenal sponsors.
We are Always Buying Books in Joplin, Missouri, and they are the sponsor for the event on the October 15th, the Dark Ozarks October Country, as well as Beard Engine Brewing Company in Alba, Missouri. So we are very appreciative, and as well as our venture with Branson Podcast Network, where you can catch our podcast.
100%. So excited about all of this, really, and so appreciative of the folks who have reached out and become part of the sponsorship team. It's a lot of fun, certainly, but it also opens doors for us to do events, and I'm thrilled. Quickly, I say that and then I take a long pause. Great. It's been a long day.
It has been.
Sides. And my new favorite
we were
place.
On the radio. We were on the radio 12 hours ago.
yes, we were. Oh my gosh, had coffee then, have coffee now. It's a beautiful circle of caffeinated life. And we'll get into that in here in just a second. But my new favorite place to buy books is Always Buying Books, and just picked up a new title that you picked up for me. Yeah. Because Bob advertised it online. I looked at it and said, I want it. And it proved popular because there's only 2 copies of this. And the first one had already sold.
It had, and to someone you know.
Mm-hmm.
Yours truly. Bob was rather amused when I went in to pick up your book.
So strongly recommend following Always Buying Books in Joplin. There's a great Facebook group as well as the Facebook page. And if you have questions, you can reach out to them. Also, the Beard Engine Brewing Company in Alba, Missouri, as well as the Alba Press, which is where you get your paninis, and I still want a grilled cheese sandwich and a black beer. That's on the list for next time. It's a beautiful location. It's haunted. We did a investigative survey there a couple of weeks ago, and there's so much history packed into such a comparatively small space. Alba's not a big town. No. I can't wait to go back.
Me either. And, we're going to have some more announcements in conjunction with that coming soon. So of things to come. So very exciting.
And so we'll see if my functional cognitive powers dissipate over the course of the evening. I picked you up in front of the admittedly haunted Old English Inn in downtown Hollister, Missouri, in the 6 o'clock hour a.m. this morning.
And thankfully, you brought me coffee.
I did. And then we made our way over to the fantastic radio headquarters of Branson Podcast Network to step into the recording room and also the broadcast room with Josh Grisham.
Yes, and that was a lot of fun, and proving to be a fun venture, joint venture with the radio stations down there, and the podcast wouldn't make it live if it weren't for him. So
absolutely,
yes, he's the one who has to hit the publish button.
we appreciate all of their hard work, and we're excited to be partnered on that mass communication platform.
We do. We certainly are. So go check out BransonPodcastNetwork.com. If you're in the Branson area, certainly listen to the stations, and more to come there.
Very much. And just briefly, Saturday was State of the Ozarks Fest 22.
Yes.
And we made it.
We made it. It was a long day, but it certainly was fun.
It was huge public turnout. Actually, I put together an article this afternoon, and I did a quick, actually specific final count. 87 separate booths filled on the street.
Yeah, there was a lot going on, and the crowd was big. We were busy all day with the State of the Ozarks and Dark Ozarks booth, and just thank everybody.
Absolutely. So appreciate everyone coming out. And already working on September 16th, 2023 is already getting penciled in on the calendar. I'll start stressing about that momentarily. But this week, I'm just focused on the fact that it's done. It was successful. Most everyone was happy. And it was our largest and most well-attended event yet.
Yay. And yeah, it was great. So can't wait till next year.
Oh, absolutely. So lots of great opportunities to get to meet us in person, because we're just that exciting. And we get to meet you all as well, which we look forward to. Go to paranormalsciencelab.com for more information, as well as in some cases, ticket information. And it's also important for people to know that a large chunk of the proceeds, when it is a ticketed event, a large chunk of the proceeds go to help the historic structure that is the centerpiece of the event. So not only can you have a really cool event, have a lot of fun at what we're doing, but you can also be helping preserve historic locations for the next generation.
Yes. And with that, hoodoo.
Mm-hmm. I do love some hoodoo. Probably being facetious, but I am particularly fascinated by the study and practice of hoodoo, and it's even in its specificity, because hoodoo is separate from voodoo, and that's important to understand, that there's really unique sources historically and culturally for hoodoo, and those, of course, a primary source originates very similarly to voodoo, which is, I think, one of the reasons for the misconception that they're the same thing, and that is West African animist religious tradition.
Yes, and I guess if people are, saying what is the difference between hoodoo and voodoo, they both have religious aspects. Voodoo, the religion, is much more specified and rigid. It is Catholicism. Basically, you have hoodoo, and then you add Catholicism to it, and you have voodoo to a large extent.
Yes, is a really broad view, just to help you.
Yeah. Without trying to do a graduate level survey course on the difference.
Right. We're saving that for the subscribers later tonight.
Yep. And the And hoodoo tends to, I mean, it's very spiritual. It views the practice as using and manipulating spiritual energies through practice, whereas there's a much more ritualistic aspect with voodoo that a lot of it does come from the Catholic Church and those practices. So,
and of course, there's and we'll cover some of this tonight here on the long format, but there's some very important and understandable socio-political reasons and cultural reasons for that, particularly in, of course, Haiti and Santo Domingo, and then neat crossover. Now, other elements that I think set hoodoo apart are a admittedly existent influence from essentially poor white Europeans.
Yes, that very much true.
That is something that oftentimes gets overlooked in the larger discussion. We have an understanding that individuals were leaving Europe for a variety of reasons. Some seeking, simply better economic, opportunity, but many for the fact that they were being persecuted for their religion. Huguenots being a great example of that, and in some cases, the to perhaps a lesser degree, the Puritans, etc., the Pilgrims. I think to a certain degree that the some sentiment in England being, let's just get them over to the other side of the Atlantic and they can do their thing over there, as opposed to some of the more bloody things that were happening contemporarily. But Huguenots again come to mind, as well as Quakers, and that's a big story. I just found out recently a lot of my Heston ancestors had strong ties to Quakers, so
that's not surprising. Actually, some of my family did as well as some of the Huguenots. So,
and I actually know a Huguenot family descendants that are here in the Ozarks as well. And one of interesting, I'm doing a little bit of a deep dive diversion, but one of the family names that's associated with the Kendrick house, as we've discussed, is Janny. And Janny is actually the my grandmother's paternal grandmother's maiden name. And I had the opportunity to have a great discussion with my uncle, who has studied. He's a history professor, a retired history professor from Pennsylvania. So I was like, okay, tell me more about this. And he said, well, the first thing that you have to know about the Jannies is that they started out as Janets, and they were in France, obviously, and they came over with Bill in 1066. So yeah, and somewhere along the line, became Quakers, which I think was probably a bit far removed from the original knights and nobility coming over with William the Conqueror. So that's just a bit of fun trivia about me, but it is associated with the Kendrick house in Carthage as well. And then, although we're not going to do, we've covered things like Cherokee Black Magic, but associated with hoodoo is the very strong Native American connection feeding into the North American practices.
Right. And often the sort of the broad discussion on the topic is the influences with Native Americans and African Americans in the early days, developing the American version of hoodoo. And as you said, often that poor white settlers' influence was left out. But what most people in that discussion leave out is that in society at that time, poor whites were pretty much in the same category socially as Native Americans, and in some aspects, even enslaved Americans. So they interacted with the white poor settlers where they didn't with the landed gentry. And so the influences from Europe came in, as well as Africa, as well as Native American influences.
They did. And it's something that I think we either don't see today or we pretend like it's not there. Especially if we, are really following the official position that all Americans are created equal, and therefore we don't actually have an aristocracy. And then there's all the rest of us. But especially, you take, especially even take the Commonwealth, for example, the Old Dominion, and essentially what was, landed gentry of Virginia to such a large degree. And then you look at all the people who were holding it up.
Right. And
something that I think comes along with that process is, and we've seen I think for better or for worse, and I lean toward for better, by the end of the 20th century into today, that association with church is less of your business calling card for respectability.
Yeah.
But that's something that has taken a couple of hundred years to sort of shake its way out in the process. You back up, and of course, in the early days of colonies, et cetera, when, yes, we are giving, religious freedom as part and parcel with being an American, but at the same time, adherence to a specific church and or specifically to the Anglican Church in association with England being a requisite to open certain doors. The opposite side of that, and of course that being associated with comparative wealth, the opposite side of that is that you have your poor settlers who in some cases may be disenfranchised because they are of a different Christian sect, particularly Christian Protestant sect. But in some cases, they may be disenfranchised because they are following a different pattern of beliefs entirely, which may be the reason that they immigrated, first of all. And second, as the histories of America, North America, are being written, these are people who are not necessarily getting their history written because they're still hiding their belief structures for fear of religious persecution. And I think that hoodoo fits well within that strata.
Very much so. And often hiding in plain sight, so to speak, but but very much trying to stay off the radar.
Or moving into the hiding in plain sight to me is fascinating because you're dealing with oftentimes symbols, talismans, practices that portions of them can be displayed publicly. The hex symbols on the barns in Pennsylvania is one of them to me. Yeah. And then people who don't know, the uninitiated into the occult, because it's literally what we're talking about. Hidden knowledge is the uninitiated can look at it and say, oh, that's so pretty, or that's interesting.
Exactly. And sometimes incorporated into quilts or things like that. And people think, oh, it's a pretty pattern. And that's all it is, but it was more than that.
Very, very much so. And that actually reminds me, I need to send you a copy of the book cover. But so again, weird tangent. I guess this is what happens when I've just been up for way too long. But I have a book on African-American quilts, slave era and shortly thereafter.
Oh, neat.
And it is fascinating. My mom bought the book in the 1990s. And there was the source citations are from a purely academic standpoint are somewhat questionable because at some level within the book, it basically says, yeah, but we don't know. But the other thing to balance this out is that the oral tradition, the oral histories passed down within particular families. And in this case, the book's primary source was an elderly African-American woman in South Carolina, in Low Country, talking about that this was coming from a sociocultural context in which there weren't a lot of people running around documenting things during the 1860s and prior. So you kind of take what you can get. That said, the basic approach is that quilts, along with obviously we know many other mediums of art, particularly the spiritual, but in this case, we're talking about quilts. The quilts were used as signposts to guide escaping slaves on the Underground Railroad.
Yeah, they would be hung, like they would be hung out as someone was doing laundry to give signals that safe, it's not safe, or go this way, that way, etc. And I think that's a good illustration of the fact that when you talk about the history of hoodoo in America, a lot of this, again, was not being written down. You didn't have a lot of spells being written down or practices. A lot of it was word of mouth, handed down through a family or from one practitioner to an apprentice. And so you get sources where you have someone that is relating what they have been told over time. And it's easy to try to dispel credibility of it, or to say, well, then this is all made up, none of it's real, it has no effect. And that is from our modern perspective of the assumption of literacy, the assumption of documentation, whereas most of history has never been documented. Correct.
It is. And as we moved into a postmodern era, quote unquote, I think that there is certainly the potential for a unique level of arrogance.
I think so. And especially when information is, at least current information, is so readily available too.
Yes. It's, and I think a lot, of course, there's a catch-22, but the assumption that if it isn't written down, it didn't exist. That is imperialist arrogance at its height.
It is. By the same token, presuming that because it's written today, when the ability to leave your mark, online, etc., is so easy, does not necessarily mean it's true either.
Very, very true. Reminding me of several memes. One involving Abraham Lincoln warning us about Photoshop.
Yeah, exactly. But with that background to note, how about we delve a little bit into sort of the motifs in the subject in the Ozarks to start with that are seen a lot.
And something that seems consistent to me, and I'll throw this out there just for discussion, is that the motif, or the superficial motif, the end result, so to speak, of hoodoo, of conjure, of omen, of Native American lore, etc.
Mm-hmm.
It is pretty readily acknowledged. You don't have to dig too terribly deep to get a reference here in the Ozarks. However, something that is oftentimes missing is what I would classify as the source contextualization. Where is this coming from, and how does it fit into this interlocking web or interconnected web of culture within the Ozarks? Because oftentimes a single reference will tie back to multiple sources, and then we, at this point, at this end of the game, are left trying to parse out, where did this come from? How did it get incorporated? And the Ozarks, I find this fascinating because on the surface level, the Ozarks were the area in which, first of all, they were the area in which industry went around. The Industrial Revolution came up to the Ozarks and diverged north and south because it was hard to build railroads through the hills.
Yeah.
And it was simply more economic to go north and south where the land was much flatter. And so, and of course, industry followed the development of the railroads. And so the upland, the rugged upland plateau remained, while not unchanged, was not drastically impacted by the Industrial Revolution until about 40 years after the rest of the nation. That said, in terms of the people movements and the old trails, the Ozarks have been a crossroads and a hub of people moving through and people influencing from a wide variety of European, Old World influence and settlement, African American via slaves on the first of all on the Missouri River in Little Mississippi, as well as influenced up from the deep south of Arkansas. You have multiple Native American groups, First Nation peoples, either already in the Ozarks or beginning in the 1820s being moved into the Ozarks.
Yep.
And so, and realistically, even with what I would classify, and this is me getting way too mystical for my own good, but the potential of ancestral memory of much more ancient America's peoples that were first of all the bluff dwellers, but the mound builders whose cultures we know from Cahokia, we know from the Spiro Mounds, we know that they in many cases seem to exhibit strong similarities with some aspects of Aztec and Mayan culture. And these were peoples who had clearly existed over this space for generation after generation after generation. And to a certain degree, from almost a metaphysical standpoint, I can't help but think that they left their mark, even if we're unconscious of it, not just a physical mark.
Exactly. And certainly that is the tenor of accounts of people discovering the mounds. That was their impression. And so you do have all of those factors coming together. And that being said, there's sort of a grouping of certain signs that are viewed in the Ozark culture as signs of hoodoo and witchcraft.
Yes.
And hoodoo and witchcraft go hand in hand, we should say.
That's what I was going to say. For the uninitiated, and sometimes for the initiated, heavy crossover or the inability to distinguish between a hoodoo practitioner and a witch.
Yeah, often the answer there is it one or the other? Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's very much the case. And I think for one reason is that these practices existed for so long before there were these kind of labels too.
Agreed. And before internet searches to parse everything out and put it in a neat, tidy little digital box.
Right. Yeah.
And as we discussed, the essentially poor European white influence not only did have an impact in terms of the development of hoodoo, but also your practitioner work of poor white Europeans is essentially your witch, your traditional European witch.
Yes. Yes. So that being said,
yes,
the signs in the Ozarks typically, of course, the biggest one is a booger dog or a cat, sometimes a boar.
Yes.
And no, it's not what you pick out of your nose. I always find that amusing. And there's different places in the Ozarks that have that label. Probably the largest space would be Douglas County, Missouri, which is known as Booger County. And people will say, well, why is it named that? Well, it goes back to so many stories coming out of that area of booger animals. And, it is a derivative, basically an anglicized and then Americanized version of boggard, which is a Scottish word for a ghost or almost a poltergeist version, a meaning.
Yes. It reminds me of an old Scottish tale. I'll make this very short, but it's one of my favorites. Of a family in a rural Scottish cottage who was being haunted by one of these, and the bogle and it's they finally they've had it up to here with the poltergeist activity.
Mm-hmm.
And they finally decide that they're going to move. And so they pack everything up, the kids, the household items, everything into the wagon, and they move over the mountain to another cottage. And are just about to get moved in when the voice of the poltergeist, the boggart, plaintively comes out of one of the big stone jars that they brought with them and said, "Why are we moving?"
I like that.
He was sad. And
then the screaming started.
Yes, exactly.
And then he was probably sadder.
Right. Wonderful familiarization, I think. And it really speaks to the Scots-Irish influence, immigration and settlement in the Ozarks.
It really does. And in the Ozarks, then the boogers became associated with animals and shape-shifting. So you kind of have a dichotomy here. You have phantom animals And then you have actual creatures that are generally witches who have shapeshifted into these forms, even though they typically look the same. And one, they're black, a large, an animal that's out of proportion, larger than it should be in real life. Usually a dog, a boar, a cat, could be even a bear, although that's not as common. And so, and I love the fact that you have both, that they're, you have these tales that it's a phantom, and actually one out of Douglas County, out of Booger County, being one of my favorites from the Civil War, the one where the soldier sees actually the phantom boar hog, and during the war, it had become a belief that seeing one of these phantom animals was a death omen, that if you went into battle after seeing one, that you would die. And so they are encamped, they know they're going to fight the next morning, and he sees this booger boar, and he's telling everyone, he's afraid he's going to die. So they go into battle, he survives, he's bragging to everyone that he's beaten the curse because he didn't die. And then that very night, sitting around the campfire, he's cleaning his gun, and it discharges accidentally and kills him.
Yes.
And the moral of the story is that you can't escape the fate of seeing this vision.
Right. It is an inexorable death omen. And that was something that popped into my head during the YouTube live. Quick shout out. We are on YouTube. You can go check us out there. But not at this moment. We're talking here. You all can stay right here. But that in the categories, some of this is within hoodoo, within the scope of hoodoo. Some of it is, or hoodoo practice. Some of it is outside the scope of hoodoo practice. There is I think, a fairly rational assumption, a reasonable assumption, that if you are a skilled hoodoo practitioner, you can recognize these various forms.
Yes, or at least signs that sort of the tells. And again, part of those are it isn't quite right. The dog is too big. It's bigger than even a wolf. The boar is unnaturally large. And then sometimes they're headless as well.
Yes.
That's a pretty good giveaway that it's probably not a regular dog or boar.
A giant headless animal. Exactly. And so we have sort of three broad categories, and can continue to use the word broad category because it's important when you're dealing with this sort of stuff to not get things too tightly packed into an expectational cubicle or box, because there's crossover.
There's crossover, and an ingenious practitioner is not going to be stereotypical.
Yes. So the aspect of a booger dog, particularly, or the black boar, as a death omen to me. Now, there may be references, I suspect there are, to West African as well as Native American cultures. But what it really strikes me in this particular regard, especially with the Scots-Irish and European lore that's associated, is it is heavily reminiscent, particularly directly influenced or nearly directly influenced by the concept of the old pagan gods.
Yes, I do believe so.
That these animals, the appearance of these animals, are the apparition or the omen of fate, that the the universe, so to speak, has said this is going to happen, and and to quote Going, well, here's your sign. It's and that it is inescapable, as is the reference with the Civil War soldier in Douglas County during the war.
Exactly, and that really is a good illustration of this concept. And again, kind of relating to the Celtic gods, and as well as Native American lore. Another motif that you see a lot in the Ozarks is a practitioner or witch turning into deer to play tricks upon hunters, which of course is also very reminiscent of deer woman legends.
It is,
basically enticing men to their demise.
It is, and there again, like not keep having things in approximate, placing phenomena in approximate spaces, but not neatly tucking them into boxes. I think that's an important thing to keep in mind here, because again, with the crossover, so we could assume, I think it's fair to assume that if you are a hoodoo practitioner, if you're a witch, if this is part of your lore and tradition, if you were to observe a death omen, you would probably recognize it as such.
Yes, yeah, it would be kind of hard to fool another practitioner.
Yes. Now, there is a possibility that a death omen could be conjured for a variety of reasons, but there's also the possibility that the death omen simply is.
I think we're back. Can you hear me?
And we're back. Hopefully,
and
yes.
We're back. Yeah. Not sure what happened there.
No, it froze on both sides for me. Yeah. I don't know.
Yeah, it did here too. So, but I think that, as you said, sometimes it just is. I think that is the most uncomfortable possibility for most people to face.
I think so. And then on the next sort of the other side of that, you have the capacity of, or the potentiality for witches and hoodoo practitioners to shift, to shape shift into other things. We see that throughout Ozarks lore. And then, of course, more of a crossover into some Native American Black magic, which we've discussed in depth. We won't get into in depth here, but I think it was worthy of reference, of a crossover of witches as inhuman beings, and then the inhuman being as a witch shifting into an animal, and that animal functioning almost as, in some cases, almost as a ghoul or almost as a vampire.
Yes, very much so. And often, at least in the Ozarks, those situations, typically they have shifted into, again, a Black animal, whether it's a dog, bear, cat, etc. And there's lore that to kill such a shape-shifting witch, it has to be a silver bullet, which of course goes straight back to French and Germanic lore of werewolves.
It does, and with silver as a ward,
as a purifying metal.
Yes, and I don't know what I'm talking about here, but I'm going to say it anyway because it's somewhat topical. Silver is also associated with the moon and with the goddess Diana.
That's true. I mean, that is true. And often these shapeshifters and these phantoms as well are often seen at night under the moon, etc. So there may be a connection there.
And the potentiality of essentially fighting fire with fire, so to speak, as an analogy.
I think that's fair. I think that's fairly fair to say there. But I find it interesting that you have these same sort of creatures that can be just a phantom, or it could be a physical creature that is a witch that's shapeshifted. I find it interesting that, again, you might see it and it could be one or the other, unless you are well versed in this and have some tells.
Yes.
And then another very common motif is the basically warnings brought by nocturnal birds, particularly owls.
Especially owls, sometimes whippoorwills.
Yes, but that typically being a sign that a practitioner is watching you or acting against you. But not so much that they have shifted into that creature. It to me, it has a very Norse feel of Odin's ravens almost.
It really can, and what I think is interesting, just in terms of the amalgamation of cultures mixing together over several hundred years, a lot of that aspect of the familiar, particularly with owls and whippoorwills, especially owls, as a strongly negative, a black omen, is associated with Native American lore, Cherokee lore, and used to great effect in at least one short story by H.P. Lovecraft. And at the same time, like, just in terms of my my ancestral tradition, we have a great issue with snakes, but we love owls.
Yeah.
So and whippoorwills. I always consider the hearing an owl, whether it's large owl or screech owl, hearing a whippoorwill at night. All of these being actually, in my personal family tradition, we always took those to be good signs, and so it was a surprise to me to find out that they were considered, highly negative in other cultures.
That's the same, because I mean, to be honest, I was always taught by both my grandmothers that hearing a whippoorwill was actually a good sign.
Yes. Yeah.
And so I always found that odd when I started hearing that it was not. So somewhere there's that amalgamation.
It is, and I wonder. Well, at this point it's just conjecture, but I do find it interesting that you and I, quite separately, actually grew up with whippoorwills and owls at almost as good luck, almost as a good luck sign.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, actually, my mother did have some owls as good luck signs.
Yeah. So that, and of course, we used to have bats that would, come play in the house, but that's another story entirely.
Bats we're not seen as a bad thing either. So.
No, I've never seen that.
But it may go back to we come from a very similar ancestral background too.
Very, very true. And it does make me wonder, in terms of, the point of similarity is Celtic settlement.
Yeah. Very true.
And not all of the Celtic settlements were poor whites. Some of them were landed gentry when they were on their way over, et cetera. But a lot were coming, particularly the Scots Irish from Ulster were coming as to a degree Protestant refugees, attempting to find a better life where they were escaping famine and war.
Very true. Very, very true. I think one thing to say too in this area, when we're talking about practitioners, is that there's a strong belief that in this actually is in that newspaper article from 1904 that includes a interview with a hoodoo priest. That and a hoodoo is a practitioner. That
Correct.
basically that they are born, not made, so that you're either going to be one or not, which is very similar to sort of the belief in some sectors in old Europe about witchcraft, as well as shapeshifters and things like that, as well as psychics and seers, that you either are born with it or not. And I do find interesting, I've not seen which source it's under, that you do typically traditionally hear that signs that of a future practitioner or someone with second sight is born with cow or is albino, or also a third thing is having green eyes. So there you go. So I guess I advertised to the world with my green eyes. So.
Which is, I think that it's, again, these are things that have in various ways worked their way into the substrate of modern consciousness, but again, just a little bit below.
Right.
I'm going to have to check on my puppy for just a second.
Okay.
But we have this St. Louis Republic article from 1904 in regards to a hoodoo murder. If you could give folks just a quick rundown of the case,
okay.
I will be right back.
Okay. Yeah, this is interesting because so little of these kind of things are actually in print and recorded. And this was actually a murder trial that went on in, I believe, St. Charles, Missouri, which is just barely north of St. Louis, but it's very indicative of hoodoo throughout the region. There's testimony in the trial of Price Edwards. He was an African-American man and who ultimately was convicted of murder, and that the testimony showed that people in the area still believed, as they say, quote, the quaint superstitions and customs that prevailed among people before the Civil War. So by this point, again, people are thinking these things are kind of fading into the past or just a legend. But it says the most interesting one set forth and the one surrounded by the most mystery is the fact of the hoodoo. Edwards, the convicted man, is believed to be a genuine hoodoo, and the sentence condemning him to death, strange as it may seem, is received by people with delight. Philip Hubbard, on the witness stand, swore to Edwards' uncanny powers. And by the way, Mr. Hubbard was as well an African-American man. And he asserted that it was his using them that Henderson and Castillo, the other men implicated in the murder of a Joe Buckner, were influenced to assist in the crime. And in pop culture, we see this now as use of voodoo on zombies to do a priest's bidding. But basically, that's kind of what they're describing as having happened. In fact, he says in here, hoodoos are born, not made. The first and all important thing is to discover the proper herbs from which one may gain the power, and they are not the same for any two persons. And the search for the proper ones often consumes many years' investigation. When the herbs are found, they must be dug from the ground with great secrecy and ceremony. So basically, you have to find your own form of hoodoo. And what works for you doesn't necessarily work for someone else. But, and he goes on to say that, you know, that to make something really work, you want something of your victim, you know, a piece of clothing is best so that you can wrap the herbs in it, which of course would become your fetish bag, or some people would say a hetz bag. Ironically, in the Ozarks, I've also heard that instead of a bag, a bowl would be used.
Interesting.
A fetish bowl that it would have the contents of the spell seen in the bowl, and it placed somewhere, usually under a floorboard or something like that. But again, that's from accounts that I've been told. And I've even asked why a bowl and not a bag. And one person told me that what they had always been told is if it didn't have to be moved, you put it in a bowl and left it somewhere.
Okay.
I don't, and maybe it's just personal preference. I don't know. But again, they talk about being in proximity to the victim, staring at them, almost, you know, pretty much the evil eye in Romani belief. So, I mean, what you're hearing here is very much almost Eastern European lore there. And so it's really interesting. You know, the detail here. This is one of the more detailed accounts that I've ever seen actually in writing.
It is, and it makes me think a reference. And a little bit of a paraphrase on this, but W.E.B. Du Bois referenced hoodoo as, quote, that vein of vague superstition which characterizes the uneducated.
Yes, and I mean, and I can see him saying that because he was such an advocate for education, and that education would be the means for African Americans to succeed after the war in the latter 1800s. There's also an account involving Frederick Douglass that while he was escaping slavery, and he did escape multiple times, I think twice before he succeeded, that a hoodoo warned him he would fail.
Yes.
And he did. A lot of it is perception. And of course, one pop culture motif is that these practices only work if you already believe in them.
Right.
But traditionally, it would be the opposite.
I was going to say, in so many cases, and the literal practice of hoodoo is heavily framed by Delta blues.
Yes.
And a continuing motif. What we see in terms of the practical use of hoodoo throughout the Ozarks, as well as elsewhere, and elsewhere as a general rule being the Deep South, as well as the Upland South.
Yeah. And
interestingly enough, our three people groups that we're looking at, the poor white settlers, the African slaves, and the Native Americans, were heavily in contact with one another in the Upland South.
Yes. Yes. Probably most there. And then with expansion and migration came west.
Yes. And heavily. So, but you look at, really the framing, the contextualization and framing of hoodoo in culture, the first and best place to look is traditional blues, traditional Delta blues.
Yes.
And
there's lots of references that people probably don't even associate.
Yes. And with that, a common theme, I believe, is that the person who is being hoodooed doesn't necessarily have to believe in it for it to work.
Right. And that's what I think is interesting with sort of a lot of the pop culture the last, say, 50 years, is that idea of, it's the scientific mind, so to speak, saying if you don't believe, it has no effect.
Yes.
And that is controverts, hundreds or thousands of years of practice on 3 continents.
It is, as well as what appears to be similarity of practice from 3 continents before they started getting together here.
That's true, which I always find very interesting, because to me it says that there's more likely that there is substance here if it grew up in that disparate of areas separated by oceans, and then when it came together, it was a very gentle mingling, so to speak.
Yes, and again, I think a more postmodern perspective would say that these people groups got together. We don't necessarily, perhaps solely for socioeconomic reasons, and then they sort of created their own thing and said that it was related. I think that is a bit myopic, because what it appears is that one of the reasons for getting together, one of the reasons for the sharing of information, when in other instances these 3 groups were quite at odds from purely ethnic reasons, that that there was shared commonality of practice.
It was one area that there was common ground.
And to me, again, that is unbelievably fascinating. Coming back to the 1904 St. Louis Republic article on hoodoo, and I know you've already referenced this, but this I want to dig into for just a moment. Hoodoos are born, not made. The first and all important thing is to discover the proper herbs from which one may gain the power. The herbs are not the same for any 2 persons, and the search for the proper ones often consumes many years' investigation. When the herbs are found, they must be dug from the ground with great secrecy and ceremony. And somehow I can just hear the ancestral voice of W.E.B. Du Bois screaming across the century, going, "This doesn't make any sense." So I'm going to take a modern, or perhaps a postmodern critique perspective for just a moment, because it seems a little bit in contrast to some of the other aspects of hoodoo. Mm-hmm. And basically, you know, from a cursory view, and I think it is on a cursory view that this doesn't make sense. It's on a deep view that it begins to contextualize. The cursory view basically says it's super secret, but it's completely different for everybody. So have at it, and either it works or it doesn't. And if it does work, great. And if it doesn't work, too bad for you. And if it does work, it only works because everybody else believes that it works, and you just got everybody buffaloed.
Possibly. And if you're wrong.
Yeah. So, you know, it's just it's you know, that aspect, which is difficult to wrap the mind around and take really seriously as a practice, which I think that much of hoodoo can be taken seriously as a practice.
Yes. But on the other hand, you know, I think that there is also at times sort of woven in there some intentional subterfuge, so that, you know, to discourage outsiders from meddling or trying to learn, you know, we don't need too many practitioners, that kind of thing. And if outsiders are dismissing it because it doesn't make sense, then it's easier to operate and hide in plain sight.
Right. So in its ephemeral and seemingly nonsensical nature, it's basically functioning as a very high-end psyop, but only from the ground up.
Grassroots.
Mm-hmm. I like it a lot. It is something that I find really interesting. So the reference that hoodoo conjurers were often Black people with power over white people.
Yes. Yeah. And again, it's that idea, and I think again the adherence of that, it was even more so with voodoo, but it became a way to have an influence over, if it wasn't your literal enslaver, the sort of the moneyed interests that were perceived as keeping people poor.
Right. And, you know, we see individuals, and I think from a very common sense perspective, we see individuals turning to hoodoo in an attempt to find justice in, you know, in a cultural connotation in which, you know, the traditional justice system may be very, you know, either unavailable or simply isn't trusted.
Exactly. Yeah, because the cavalry was not coming for them. So,
right.
I agree wholeheartedly there. I want to shift to a couple of topics that are purely American for a moment.
Yes.
One comes from the Wyandotte people.
Yes.
And that's the lore of the Hoostradoo. And it is reminiscent to me of hoodoo and voodoo in the outcomes, not necessarily the practice itself, but that it's a evil spirit that inhabits a recently deceased person, so inhabits corpses and causes them to rise from the grave and to devour the living.
Yes.
So you have a bit of vampire lore and a bit of, you know, the undead zombie motif going hand in hand. So you have, you know, you sort of basically have a vampire and a zombie.
Right.
In the outcome. But an interesting part of the lore is that there is an effective protective ward of redbud branches from a redbud tree.
Yes.
And, you know, I've heard a lot of lore about different plants and trees in these kinds of things. As far as I am remembering, this is the only instance for a redbud that I know.
Agreed. And, you know, in terms of redbud lore, most of it, you know, the only other dominant aspect of redbud lore is a bit of a stretch. It's sweet, but it's a bit of a stretch. Well, actually, it isn't. I was thinking of the dogwood. Sorry. The dogwood has a really sweet Eastertide Christian legend. The redbud is also referred to as the Judas Tree and is said to be the tree that Judas hanged himself from and was cursed afterwards. It isn't, and the redbud's native to North America, so there goes that. And to explain the fact that the redbud tree is not large enough, it doesn't grow large enough to hang someone from. The legend explains that and says that after it was used as a hanging tree, Judas hanging tree, that it was so filled with such contrition that it never grew any bigger afterwards. Before it was a huge tree. None of that is true, but it is indicative of the fact that redbuds were noted in some way as having an ancestral, folkloric, or spiritual component. I find it particularly interesting in terms of the Wyandot tradition because it is clearly being associated with warding from evil.
Yes. Now, and I do have to say that, see, I grew up with the hearing from my grandmother, Livingston, that redbud was good luck. And in fact, she had a redbud tree at her house in Arkansas City, Kansas, that I'm not even sure how old it was, but it had come from, I think, her mother or grandmother, I'm not sure. And she insisted that when my parents would move, that they take a cutting of the tree and plant it where they lived. And in fact, we still have a redbud tree in the yard at the farm that came from her tree. So I just grew up, hearing that, it was good luck to have a redbud tree. Agreed.
And redbuds, of course, do grow native in the Ozarks. And they're extraordinarily beautiful. There's the hybridized, more bountiful hybridized versions that you can buy in the store, but just in the mountains, they do grow naturally. I'm just curious, was there any particular lore about placement, etc., or was it just make sure that it's in the yard?
It was just that you were to have one in your yard, and no particular placement that I'm aware of. Okay.
I think that's really interesting. I grew up with a love of redbuds, but not, and we had one in the yard, but not necessarily looking at it as specifically for good luck, just because we understood, I think intuitively, and we understood on a certain level that it was a very special tree and it was something that you wanted to have.
Yeah, I remember my grandmother always being very insistent that it was good luck to have one.
That is neat to know. I'd not fully made that conceptual cross.
I'm like I said, I don't really know why, but I can remember her saying that, So she definitely viewed it as basically as a ward or, good luck or protection. So If anyone has any stories that would add to that, I'd love to hear it. So
absolutely. And possibly as a place to, speaking of wards and the potential, we've talked about the Hoodoo residue of the Wyandottes, and talking, just perhaps concluding with some of the traditional hoodoo wards.
Okay.
As well as the Sukyan and the Buhag. Okay.
And the Sukyan might be a good explanation because its lore specifically has components that's very typical of wards and protection.
It does. It does. And the thing to, oh, sorry, I was getting distracted by giant wolves. Something that's easy to overlook, a good aspect of hoodoo, and you do see this throughout the Ozarks, is wards against evil.
Yes, that's true. I guess we could start there. Wedge pads are one.
Yes.
Which are three-sided thorns or pieces of wood carved into triangular spikes, basically, and then buried in the path to the door, so that a practitioner can't cross it. Over time, sort of the Christian version of that became, it was tri-sided because it represented the Trinity. But that idea goes back much further, and three-sided symbols typically are seen as wards throughout European history, including for the Celts, the triple spiral.
Yes.
So I think it's more three-sided in that traditional sense is where it originated, and then it acquired sort of the Protestant connotation, even though I'm not really sure why the Protestants seem to adhere to that more than Catholics, even though they associate it with the Trinity. I'm not sure why. Anyway, also witch bottles,
yes.
which often you would hang glass bottles from a bush, or some people would slide them onto branches. Those hanging would act almost like a wind chime, and it's supposed to scare off spirits and practitioners. Paint blue, of course, was often used to paint porch ceilings, window sills, shutters, and it was the idea that it would confuse spirits, but presumably witches as well, because they can't cross water.
Right. And and part of the bottle trees, the aforementioned bottle trees, along with the belief that evil travels in straight lines.
Yeah.
Evil travels in straight lines. So you make a curving path, and then at the juncture points of the curving path, place the bottle trees, and evil will find itself, will work its way into the bottles and the morning sun and become trapped by night, and then be destroyed when exposed to the morning sun.
Yes, which I find sort of interesting, because ley lines have always been associated with positive energy and spirituality, and of course are generally straight lines. But there's also other lore that, that the devil can't walk a straight line.
Yes.
So, I mean, you have contradictory lore there.
You really do. Of course, something that seems to cross-pollinate between Low Country, Caribbean, and European tradition is that a variety of spiritual beings count things obsessively.
Yes. And so spilling rice, salt, anything like anything you have that there's a lot of the marbles, needles, I've even heard, anything that they have to stop and count. And there is some lore that seems to be, it's more pop culture, modern lore that I think is a crossover from this, that applies to vampires.
Yes. And there's again, that weird cross, the Sukyan, which we'll get into in a moment, has a lot of similarity with aspects of vampirism.
Yes, but come from very different traditions.
Very different traditions. And, at the same time, and I think that this is, worthy of a little bit of analysis. We often view these disparate elements of folklore through an admittedly Age of Aquarius, New Age traditions.
Yes, that does seem to happen a lot.
Yes, and something that is consistent with the patina of New Age belief structure is oftentimes a lack of evil.
Yeah,
and that is very much at a cross purpose with the origin lore. Mm-hmm. Something that is consistent with the African lore, something that's very consistent with the Native American lore, mm-hmm. is that a number of these entities, the Cherokee Black Magic Witch, the Sukyan, as two prime examples, the Hoodoo from the Wyandots, these things are absolutely evil.
They are, and they're cannibalistic in the sense that they do devour human beings, in the literal sense. Sort of the exception to that in these origins is in Africa, that you did have that cannibalistic aspect, but they consumed people's souls, not the body.
Yes, which from a certain perspective could even be considered even more horrifying.
Yes, so you could end up with a corporal body without a soul, and your soul being lost, or at least separated. And so it is interesting that you have these various variables that are fairly consistent. But do you want to talk about the Sukyan a little bit?
Absolutely. It's it's one of my favorite because it's horrifying. And it is.
I knew that. That's why I let you do.
Yeah. It is part of Caribbean folklore. I think that's an important point to note. Now you can say, well, what's that got to do with the Ozark? Well, obviously there's a cross population or cross-populating lore from the Caribbean to the Low Country. In the Low Country, we typically see this as the Boo Hag. Yeah. There are some definite similarities there, but we also see this lore coming into the Delta. We see it coming into in the New Orleans region, and both in a from a historic perspective as well as a modern perspective, we have cross-population of these belief structures into the Ozarks, Osceola, Missouri, back before before it got burned down during the war, and also before the back when it was a port city, had a direct tie to New Orleans. Something that we saw and continue to see since Hurricane Katrina is considerable migration of people up from Louisiana, and in some cases, everything in plain sight. But in other cases, particularly with individuals from low economic status fleeing that part of the country in the face of having everything that they knew being destroyed by the hurricane, are individuals who are practitioners or heavily steeped in this lore. And we do see a rise in this type of practice in the Ozarks after 2004. So, and of course, the 1904 reference in the St. Louis Republic is referencing St. Charles, and strongly connects all of that. So just because it's Caribbean doesn't mean that it isn't associated. And again, with the Sukyan, we have one of these entities that really defies the three boxes in terms of which one to put it in. It appears as a reclusive old woman by day. By night, she strips off her wrinkled skin and puts it in a mortar. And her true form is a fireball in which she flies across the dark sky in search of a victim. The Sukyan can enter the home of her victim through any sized holes like cracks, crevices, or keyholes. So instantly, without wards, anyone is vulnerable. The Sukyan sucks people's blood from their arms, legs, necks, and soft parts while they sleep, leaving blue-black marks on the body in the morning. Again, now we've had your traditional European hag. We have the spook light. We have Saint Elmo's fire, and now we have the vampire. If the Sukyan draws too much blood, it's believed the victim will either die or become a Sukyan or perish entirely, leaving the person's killer to assume their skin. So it is also vampirically reproductive in this way. The Sukyan practices black magic, which suggests that at some form it is human-ish and is a black magic witch. And this in Brazil, it's referenced that Sukyans trade their victims' blood for evil powers. And with a demon that resides in the silk cotton tree. So to expose a Sukyan, one should heap rice around the house or at the village crossroads, as the creature will be obligated to gather every grain by grain, before dawn, and caught out in the open in the sunlight without its skin, it dies. To destroy the Sukyan, it's interesting, the Sukyan is consistently referenced as female. To destroy her, a coarse salt must be placed in the mortar containing her skin, so she perishes, unable to put the skin back on. There is, of course, a much more benign version of this in Celtic lore. It's called a Selkie, the seal people. Belief in the Sukyans is still preserved to an extent in Guyana, Suriname, and some Caribbean islands, including Dominica, Haiti, and Trinidad. So, interestingly enough, if you're a black magic practitioner, you might want to hunt a Sukyan because her skin is useful.
Yeah.
And there, in Grenada and Barbados as well. These are parts of the lore, and there is very little difference. There are some differences, but there's a lot more similarities than differences between the Sukyan of the Caribbean and the Buhag of South Carolina Low Country.
Yeah. And so, I mean, you can definitely see that crossover. And, you know, again, you know, there are various tales of spook lights, etc., that travel through people's homes, etc., that, you know, basically are impervious to barriers.
Yes.
And so we view those in a very different connotation than they would have been 300 years ago.
Right. Now that is, to me, that's a really interesting cross-reference, because of course in the Hornet Spooklight, Joplin Spooklight, whatever you want to call it, your Spooklight. I'm just going to call it Lisa's Spooklight at this point. That's fine.
Wonderful. I'll have hate mail now.
But with the surrounding farms in that area, as well as sometimes vehicles, the Spooklight just moves through whatever it wants to.
Yeah, through houses, through barns, through vehicles. Although I don't know of any accounts of people actually being attacked by it, but if I certainly could see how things like this could be observed and taken that way. And then perhaps there is something more to it.
It could be. A takeaway that a bit of this that I really hadn't put together, the aspect of the Buhag or the Sukyan being able to pass, to get through any crevice sort of thing, could actually be a way of trying to describe spooklight activity, saying, how did it get in the house? I don't know. It just got in.
Yeah. And that's very possible. Because I've heard a number of people personally describe it passing through windshields into cars and things like that. So,
right.
So might not need a keyhole or a crack if it can just go through the glass. So,
right. Very, very true. So I think the takeaway is paint everything in paint blue.
Everything,
including yourself. Just become a Smurf and you'll be safe from the Sukyan.
Or take your chances.
Just something to think about.
Okay, well, that's an image I didn't need, but
yeah. I'm going to show up at the Paracon completely blue.
You're riding in the car with you for hours like that. Okay.
Well, perhaps not. But, just to be on the safe side.
Here you go.
Well, we'll see. We'll see what happens.
Okay. That took a weird twist.
I grew up with the Smurfs. What can I say? And Andorians. Don't forget the Andorians.
Okay. I don't think that comes into this legend, though.
Probably not. But if we ever found an Andorian, we could ask them if they've ever been haunted by a Buhag. And if the answer is no, then they're the right color blue.
Perhaps. Are there any other boards you want to talk about besides Snurf Blue?
Oh, besides that, some really obsessively obvious ones, so obvious that they are cliche, but they do have a really strong sociocultural ancestry, particularly in terms of European ties, are horseshoes and rabbit's feet.
That's true. You don't see rabbit's feet near as much as you used to.
Nope.
And so makes you wonder if bad luck has increased in proportion to the use of rabbit's feet going down.
We may need to launch an investigative survey.
Okay, we'll put that on the bottom of the list.
Yeah, that's an excellent response. But it is funny. Well, and then of course, part of the reference to a horseshoes is the metal, is the iron.
Yes, that's true. As being protective. I've also heard versions, of course, it being it's been a long day. Upside down, you being trapping spirits
Yes.
at the doorway. Another ward, and we've mentioned before, is cedar boughs over the doorways.
Absolutely.
You can find references for other plants or tree branches as well.
Right.
Willow is one.
Mm-hmm. And even the aforementioned redbud. And
yeah.
It's a consistent aspect is that various plants and or trees have innate warding effects.
Yeah.
And so,
of course, these days they're popular as sage.
Right. Very popular.
Mm-hmm.
Smudging with Palo Santo as well. And that is something that is less popular or less well known is what we've already begun to reference, which is planting certain things, growing certain things in your yard or around your house, etc., to function as one part good luck charm, another part ward against evil.
Very true. Very true. I guess one of the obvious things that we should list, since we're talking about hoodoo and voodoo, is gopher dust.
Yes. And what is gopher dust?
Well, I mean, I have seen different recipes, but often the main ingredient is ground brick.
Okay. Interesting. And is it predominantly a ward?
Yes. Well, it can be used. It can use offensively or defensively. It can be used as a protection. And brick in general also is. There's various lore about burying bricks at the corners of your house or the corners of your land as protection. And I think in part it's it's based on the making of the brick out of soil, clay, etc., and then using that. But again, a lot of it came down to what did people who did not have a lot of money have available to them to use.
Right. And I can't help but, I was just going to say, I can't help but theoretically conjecture the association with the hearth.
True. And I do think that is a component.
And for people who might not know, in European lore, the hearth is often the center point of conjuring.
It is. And I think around a campfire is, particularly from the African traditions and the Native American traditions. So that made sense. Another thing that people don't think of as obvious as wards or protection, is basically different foods, as well as alcohol and tobacco.
Yes, and of course that is definitely making some strong references to voodoo tradition.
Voodoo, but also some hoodoo as well, because you are incorporating plants, but very much used in voodoo traditions. Offerings of food, usually white, rice, milk, eggs, things like that, sometimes even flour. Then tobacco, and usually to be effective, it has to be smoked or burnt.
Yes.
And then alcohol. In voodoo, it's traditionally rum, but you can use other alcohol.
Mm-hmm.
So I've seen other bourbon or whiskey used.
And I can't help but, my mind can't help but jump over to the, offering whiskey to the fairies.
Exactly. I think it's very much the same thing, offering whiskey or ale. So similar traditions grew up in 3 continents.
They did.
And they mingled.
And yes, it came together. And to a large degree, lesser so now, but still to a large degree, remains under the radar, so to speak.
Mm-hmm. Very much so. But it can be in plain sight too.
100%.
A lot of these things can be done and are done, and other people aren't aware of it if they don't know what to look for.
Very, very true. And that's okay.
Yes.
It works just the same.
Exactly. It goes back to whether it's destiny or really.
Mm-hmm.
And we're back. That may be a good place. That may be a good place to end it.
I agree. We hope to see lots and lots of you in Caney, Kansas this weekend, and or at many of the other locations that we will be at this autumn. We wish everyone a wonderful and festive first day of autumn tomorrow, and we will be back here, Dark Ozarks, first on YouTube Live, then on Facebook Live next Wednesday.
That's right. And then catch the podcast on Branson Podcast Network.
Absolutely. It's going to be great.
Good night, everyone.
Night. Thanks, Lisa. Thanks, Alex.
Thanks, Josh. Thanks, Alex.